Hello, students. Today we're going to go over the period between world wars. As an introduction, we have this sort of feeling that everyone has, this expectation of a new world that was, a new generation that was completely shattered in the world's first experience of mechanized mass killing in World War One. We have permanent changes in political and cultural landscapes. We have the rise of fascism, new governments throughout the world. And in art, we have some ideas about avant-garde, this sort of before the rest of the world, right? So this implication that artists want to be something new and exciting and sometimes shocking. Like that's their goal. They're trying to do that. We have a lot of manifestos by artists. So manifestos are this sort of public declaration of policy, and in our case, as an artist or a group, and they're meant to prod and to shock. We also have artist ideas of utopias, denouncement of present conditions, like real artists that are active in the things that are going on and making comments on it. And one of the first groups we have is what's called Dada, which you might have heard of. It began in the protest of horrors of World War One. It was more of a rebellious attitude than a cohesive movement. So we grouped them together now. They did hang out together, but maybe they didn't consider themselves as so much as a group, and they would show together, but they weren't like, oh, we all do this, we all do that. They really play with spontaneity, and they like to reflect the absurdity of the situation in the Western world. They were actually made to be anti-art. They went out of their way to be unattractive and to offend. And so here you have an example of a collage, right? Where this is not something my grandma would hang in her house, right? This is not beautiful, attractive art. And that is their goal. One of the most famous people that we would think of at that time is Marcel Duchamp, who kind of shone on his own, right? He's not just a Dadaist. He's the artist of that area. And he made a lot of work. This in particular is kind of this field called ready-mades. And these are works that are created from mass-produced objects. And he did quite a few of these. This is the best known one. This is called Fountain. And so this is a men's urinal. So this is the part that goes onto the wall, right? And this is the pipe that goes upwards. And it's just a urinal turned on its side and signed R. Mutt and then called Fountain, right? It's absurd, and there's some questions on whether he meant this as art. Again, a lot of these Dadaists and Marcel Duchamp went out of their way to be anti-art and to kind of mock the art world. But then, it's really kind of intriguing to think about. Like, for one, the word fountain implies, the fact that you piss into it, right? But then it does look like a fountain, like you would see in Rome, the Trevi Fountain, etc. This sort of like area. You could just imagine water coming down into this area, and then signed by, not his name, by R. Mutt. Hilarious. And for me, it's always been intriguing because, like, what do you actually have to do? What can you remove to still get your concept across? And so you don't have to make this idea into a painting or a drawing or even a collage would be too many layers. But just to take a urinal, turn it on its side, and call it Fountain completely changes our interpretation of it. And I think is actually quite exciting and new. This one you might be familiar with also. It's called LHOOQ, but of course in French it's another pronunciation. It's a postcard of Mona Lisa with, the mustache and the beard drawn in, which you've seen done many times in Looney Tunes and the original Batman. Joker does that to the paintings. And so, yeah, it's just kind of that outrageous irreverence towards art and art history. This is actually, if you read this in French, it becomes a term like, she is hot in the ass, or she has a hot ass. So it's also kind of playing on those terms. And of course, these artists did a lot of that, not safe for work stuff. This is some more of his work that you can see if you're ever in Philadelphia at the Art Museum there. There's this piece here where it's like a peephole, so you have to go in and look at it, and then it looks like this very strange landscape with this woman here. And then this is called the large glass, really impressive work, 2 pieces of glass with these images inside, and then it's cracked. So I really like him. I like his work. I like how he responds to things, how he kind of, gives an FU to the art world and society at large. We have Man Ray, which is not his name. It's a great name, but it's not his actual name. It's a name he took on, and he's kind of the Dada leader in the United States. This one's called Gift. It's an assemblage of useless and dangerous objects. Of course, this could be a ready-made also, where you have an iron but with nails on it, so it doesn't do its job like it should. It actually won't work well. And he did a lot of work. You're probably seeing some of his images. I don't know why I didn't put it in here, but The one with the woman that looks like the violin was his work. He did a lot of work with photos. This one here, he took this woman that broke up with him. He cut out the eye of a photo of hers, put her on a metronome, and was really specific in what you should do with this. So the idea is that you cut out an eye of the photo that someone that you used to love that's no longer loves you. You put it on this. You start it, let the metronome go to its highest point, and then you try to break it with a hammer in one swing. Yeah, totally awesome stuff. Have Hannah Hawk, who was like one of the women in this group, and these guys of this era, they talk a big game in terms of their, both of the Dadaists and the other people that were talking about in their manifestos about how people are wrong and how they need to do the X, Y, and Z, and how that will help the human race. But then of course they're dicks about how they treat women. So she was not treated fairly in this group, and as you may imagine in this time period. And she's pretty famous for making these what's called photo montages, right? And so this is just cutting out photos and rearranging them to make a new work, to collage them together. It's of course somewhat of a cubist idea, right? It expands on that, the meaningful parts of the photos. And here you have this man who's, with all his contraptions that he's made, the multimillionaire, including the gun and split in head. And this idea of using the photo montage probably was allowed because that was her whole philosophy, that art is dead and it doesn't matter. You can do whatever you want, and it's the reason for the medium. But what's funny is that these methods actually become acceptable and like exciting, and like, yeah, you can make art with photos that you find around, with newspaper clippings, magazine clippings, etc. You might even consider her work as like she's using these scissors to cut through society and rearrange them in a way she wants. You'll notice that you have these androgynous characters that kind of look both female and male, because she's adding male parts to female parts. And this may have been related to her bisexuality and her attraction to masculinity in women. We have surrealism, I'm sure you've heard of, right? This movement really shows the importance of the unconscious mind, dreams, fantasies, hallucinations, etc. Sigmund Freud's type stuff. So psychology and Dadaism combined. And then a lot of the Dadaists became surrealists. Here's one who's worked in Dadaist also, is Max Ernst. Painting. This is using what's called frottage. And so that actual term is like, if you remember as a kid, maybe you put paper over a sidewalk or over a manhole cover or something and use chalk and rub it back and forth to get this effect. That's how he made this painting. And these sort of like, nightmarish, dreamlike monsters. So dreamlike, nightmarish wise, you're in surrealism territory is what you need to remember. Rene Magritte, called The Lovers. So again, surrealism, this illogical form of realism, like a dream, like it looks real, it feels real, but it's not. And his work is extremely, kind of almost funny. It's got this jolting sort of humor where these lovers are never actually touching, never actually kissing each other, always separated by that sheet. You may be more familiar with this piece of his, so he's a famous, of course, surrealist artist. And just to show you, not everybody's doing, these surrealists are doing totally different things. This is Joan Miro, and what we might call like abstract surrealism. It's suggestive, it's open-ended elements, and it emphasizes color and design over story, right? Like this could be, cubism, abstraction, if it not for all the characters that kind of come out in a childlike way. He was big in this idea of automatism, which is this method of drawing unconsciously, like just making marks and not thinking about them. And that was a big sort of process to the surrealist, and something they really recommended doing and would try to do. Like, that's how you get to the heart of what you're thinking, is just by drawing, putting pen to paper without thinking about it and letting go. He also did some sculptures too, some ready-mades, where he's putting things that exist together. This might not be a ready-made because it's, I don't know if a parrot is considered that, but these assemblages of things that exist in a strange, dreamlike manner. I have Salvador Dali, I'm sure you're familiar with, The Persistence of Memory. He really probed his own nightmares. Like, that was his methodology, was to be a paranoid person, like think about his nightmares and represent them. His work is highly illusionistic, so he's using these academic techniques to make it look realistic. But of course, it's dreamlike because clocks don't melt like this. Really strange connections, dreamlike, etc. And his work, what we might be called like representational surrealism. It goes really far into representation. He did a lot of things, and he was famous in his own time. One of the first modern artists to become a celebrity outside the art world. He, of course, like I said, suffered from nightmares and became the subject matter for his paintings. He created films, either sections of films or actual films. Unshin Andalou, you might have seen, where, you just watch it if you ever want. Like, they slice this eye, woman's eye. It's really strange, but it's short. It's definitely worth watching. And just an example that he even made sequences. So this is a film called Spellbound from Alfred Hitchcock, and he made a dream sequence within that. So he was doing a lot of things, not just in painting. He was highly sought after. We also have the further development of cubism into abstract art. Here we have it as complete abstraction, right? So similar to like how if you remember the cow painting, how we went from a cow to simple abstract shapes, we have something similar here, where it's an airplane flying some way, somehow, right? This movement is called suprematist, and it's the supremacy, their belief was the supremacy in shape and color, and how that took over all things, and how you can disassociate images into color, into shape. Fernand Ledger, this further idea of abstracted forms, how these tubular forms, if you see anything really tubular like this, you're dealing with Ledger. And yeah, cubism, heavy on the cubism, right? Like, but his forms are just, for whatever reason, really round and tubular. Human forms, pipes, etc. Constructivism. So this is a lot of Russians are doing work like this. This real goal of like a new visual language for a new industrial age. You can't do representational anymore. You can't do cubism because that's too representational. Nothing pictured but forms and colors. You might be familiar with Piet Mondrian. This is from a group that were big on making the style, the style. My Dutch is no good, but I think that's how you pronounce it. They were big on this is the end answer for utopia, right? We want universal harmony, and what does all things have? So it's about like breaking down everything. So into straight lines and primary colors in order to convey the order of nature. So like all of nature can be explained like this. And this was at the time right before the time that they were developing ideas about how atoms are split up in smaller parts. So you can see the sort of an analogy there, right? Between everything is made up of atoms. Everything that lives, that is not alive in the past and the future. You can see how it kind of has an analogy there. And very austere. And so this group, this looks like it might be made by the same guy, but it's not. Like they all decided like, we're going to use primary colors, squares, lines, and that's it. And so they made work like this. And Mondrian, which just happened to be the guy that we remember the most in terms of the basic art world. We also have what's called international style architecture, which I think on UNO we have quite a few buildings that might be considered international style. It's a deliberate contrast between the house and the surrounding area. So here's a great example of Le Corbusier, an architect, is that, number one, you can see the support structure, so it doesn't hide the way that it's actually standing. It has a lot of these undecorated rectilinear planes, right? It uses a lot of modern materials, a lot of modern appliances, these modern windows at the time. And they really thought of this place like a machine to live in, is what their goal was, their stated goal. A Mies van der Rohe piece too, or architect too. You might be familiar with him. He came up with the famous saying, "Less is more." And of course, Picasso makes work continuously and sort of changes as he goes. This is called Guernica, 1937. It's a huge painting, so 11 and a half feet by 25 and a half feet. It's absolutely huge. It's black and white. It's about war protest. It's about a bombing in the Basque town of Guernica that leveled 15 blocks. So people are horrified by the realities of war. So you have You have a dead baby here. You have this man who's kind of blown up. This thought here is that this light is actually the actual flash of the bomb. Someone coming in to see what's going on, filled with symbolism and just utter chaos and hate for the idea that we have to have war. And here's a photo of Guernica as it looked. So absolute, complete devastation, many lives lost. There's also social realism. That happens kind of it's a socially and politically committed form of art, and it's different in each country. It's kind of the sponsored norm in countries, and so in Nazi Germany and in communist Russia, it's the art form that is sponsored. The countries would suppress, ban, or burn art that was not social realism. So the abstract art that we looked at, the expressionist art that you looked at prior to in the other chapter, was hated and actually ridiculed, burned, and otherwise. So Hitler even called modern artists incompetents, cheats, and madmen. They had a degenerate art show where they showed all the art that they don't like, and it's interesting because, of course, that was a very popular art show. And so here you have this communist art, this vision of the state, right? Huge painting, and of course, social realism. You can understand how this is sensible, makes sense to people. They can. There's no ambiguity. Like, these are proud, strong men and women fighting for the cause of Russia. There's no ambiguity here. Diego Rivera. So this idea of Mexican social realism. Again, it's state sponsored, right? There was just I believe an overthrow at the change of government in Mexico. So the point of this is the liberation of the peon. So the landlords, the wealthy landowners here, their house is burning, and they're freeing the people that were ruled under a despot. Of course, it references what is happening politically. And then we even have our own in the U.S. the social realism. It is state sponsored in that it's during the Depression. So the WPA and the FSA start these programs to pay artists, along with the public works programs they're doing, to pay artists, photographers to go out and document the world, right? And they're not happy. They're not like trying to lie. This photography actually tells the truth about these people that are having actual effects from the Dust Bowl. I don't know if you've read Grapes of Wrath, but it is showing this. It's hopefully building this sympathy for those that are affected. So these people are living behind a billboard, right, in California. And so Dorothea Lange, you're probably maybe more familiar with an image like this that just shows the real hardship that America was facing after the Dust Bowl. Some other Frida Kahlo, who's kind of she was adopted as a surrealist, but this is also kind of this social realist painter. So she's like a nice mix of that. This painting's kind of about her split personality, both her European and Mexican versions, of course connected by the heart. And the hearts also reference Mexico's past as Aztec people, where human sacrifice, you remember that instance in Indiana Jones where they pull a heart out, right? Like that was something that actually maybe happened, and so that's obviously referencing that. And also her own surgical trauma. She had trouble with her heart, had many surgeries, all there. Move on to American regionalism. And so this is kind of the search in the U.S. for national and personal identity. The feeling was in Europe that art was merely provincial. So we saw some of the landscapes that came out of the U.S. They're well done, but they were kind of thought of in terms of the European modern art world as kind of provincial. It's not avant-garde enough. The U.S. public was actually quite indifferent to art. And so these artists thought to focus the subject on the local, on what's around America. And so this is called regionalism. And I'm sure you already know some famous works that would be of that style, regionalism. This is Edward Hopper, Nighthawks. So this is American regionalism. And it portrays the loneliness of American life. Like you can almost feel this even today, right? Like this is some, smallish city at night, and there's a diner open. Like I feel this in terms of America. Like this feels like America. This feels like me. Quite like it. the light coming from out here and just this vast emptiness out here and just these four people here. It's great. Some more American regionalism, Grant Wood. I'm sure you're familiar with this piece. This, hopefully, you realize now, after looking at some of the Renaissance paintings we looked at, you can tell it's definitely influenced by Jan van Eyck and Dürer. He's drawing in a way that references the stiff, long exposure portraits taken by 19th century photographers. You got the Gothic window back there. It's called American Gothic. Supposedly this is the artist's sister and his dentist, and these repeated vertical lines, right, help pull your eye out, both in the pitchfork, in his overalls, in the siding. Really great stuff. Some other American regionalism. This is Jacob Lawrence. These are awesome little gouache paintings. They're a series of 41 paintings of the black leader of Haiti, who Haiti's really awesome, man. It's like the first independent nation of Latin America and the Caribbean, the second republic in the Americas, and the only nation in the world established as a result of a successful slave revolt. So this guy kicked all the slave people out. It's awesome. And so this guy is a product of, again, this sort of state-sponsored approach. The WPA in Harlem had a community art center, and they had multiple art centers throughout the U.S. So it's just great to see these artists that maybe weren't classically trained coming out of these art centers, and he was from that. I just love it. It's got this cubism effect, a little bit of comic book like effect, animation, but just fantastic drawings, gouache on paper. And Thomas Hart Benton, of course, is a famous one too. You can tell his work. It's got this just strange, undulating masses that go together. And here they are, I assume, building a fort together. And then finally, we got a little bit of abstraction. So organic abstraction is what we're talking about. This group is formed as a response to the fascist communist refusals of abstract art. And here you just have an example, right? These two pieces of carved mahogany suggesting these growing plants and the holes open to work in light and air. And then another one you might be familiar with is Henry Moore. So, again, we got these holes that feel kind of strange, but I don't know, add this effect that, if this was just an entire mass, would feel completely different. I really like his work, how the sort of holes open up the space, but then also make sense in terms of the form. This organic shape that kind of suggests human forms without depicting it exactly. Your imagination allows your imagination to kind of make decisions like, is this her leg? Of course, her shoulders here. Just a slight face coming out of that. Great stuff. Thank you.